The rich man had a girl tied to the tracks, but a stray dog did what no one ever expected. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It's always awesome to see how far our stories are reaching. Lucy Bennett. She was 15, but she moved and spoke with the tenderness of a 10-year-old. Her cognitive condition made her innocent and deeply sensitive. Lucy never knew her mother. All she knew was that she was left at the home's doorstep with a note that read, "Forgive her. She's not to blame for anything." Her last name, Bennett, was made up by the nuns. There were never any visits, never any letters, just the clock on the wall ticking the same hours every day, and a cold caregiver who called her the slow one. That night, while the other girls slept, Lucy heard an odd sound like crackling firewood. She moved closer to the window. Across the street, by an alley, an older man with a white beard and a patched coat tended a small fire. Beside him, a large dog with golden fur and bright eyes rested calmly, as if its only purpose in life was to watch over that man. Lucy couldn't look away. Silently, she raised her hand and pressed it against the glass. No one had ever taught her what a home was, but that moment, the fire, the dog, the humble man, felt deeply true. The man was David Foster. He had fought in Afghanistan and returned with more inner scars than visible ones. After losing his wife in a car accident, his world fell apart. He never found peace, not until he rescued a puppy nearly frozen to death behind a supermarket. He named it Max. Since then, they slept under the same sky, shared what little they had, and spoke in silence. That night, without knowing it, 3 souls marked by abandonment had found each other without touching. Fate was starting to turn. Winter had settled hard over the small northeast town. The wind whistled through the cracks of old buildings and rattled the windows of St. Mary's Home for Special Children. Outside, under a bridge near downtown, David Foster carefully wrapped a blanket around Max. The dog was now grown, strong, with a solid back and intelligent eyes, as if he understood the language of the soul. David pulled a can of cold soup from his backpack and split it between 2 plastic plates, one for him, one for Max. That was the routine. Eat, talk to the dog like he was a son, and look at the stars like he used to do with his late wife, Sarah. Max listened, still, always attentive. He seemed to soak up every word. The next day, Lucy went out to the home's fenced yard during an outdoor activity. She wandered a bit away from the other girls, seeking the edge of the lot. From there, she saw the old man and the dog again across the street. David noticed her. He raised a hand in a wave. Lucy didn't respond, but she stayed there watching. Her expression wasn't fear or shyness. It was a mix of curiosity and longing. That afternoon, when the caregivers were distracted, Lucy hid a small roll in her coat and slipped out through a loose fence in the yard. She walked slowly toward where David and Max were. She stopped a few feet away. Max sniffed the air from a distance, but didn't move. David lowered his voice. "Are you lost, kid?" Lucy shook her head. She held out the roll. Max approached slowly without barking. He took the bread gently, never breaking eye contact. Lucy let out a soft laugh, the kind born from wonder, not a joke. It was the first time she'd touched an animal. David watched her. He didn't ask her name. He just said, "His name's Max. Sometimes I feel like he understands more than I do." Lucy nodded, as if those words held everything she felt. From that day on, she came back every afternoon. Sometimes she brought a cookie, sometimes she just sat. David told her stories about his time as a soldier, about the trees he saw in Montana, about his wife named Sarah. Lucy didn't always grasp the details, but she understood the emotion, and that was enough. One afternoon, while David talked, Lucy stroked Max's back with trembling hands. The dog closed his eyes. It was the first time someone had touched Lucy without yelling, without rushing her, without fear. In a glass-walled office on the 32nd floor of a downtown office building, Edward Harrison gazed over the city with the same indifference he'd show a newly acquired property. His tailored grey suit and luxury watch only masked what he truly was, a man who'd spent his life hiding the cracks in his morals under the concrete of his success. Edward was the president of one of the most influential energy companies in the Northeast. His public image was spotless. Benefactor of orphanages, sponsor of college scholarships, speaker on family values. But in private, his world was far more fragile. An assistant slipped quietly into the meeting room. "Mr. Harrison, someone insists on speaking with you. Says he's a former security employee." Edward didn't look up from the report he was reading. "Tell him to make an appointment with my secretary." "He did, but he's got documents and photos." Edward frowned. Minutes later, in a more private room, a man with a weathered face and hard eyes placed a thin folder on the table. Inside was an old black and white photo, over 15 years old. A younger Edward, smiling with a blonde woman in an open field. In their arms, a baby. The same girl Edward had paid to make disappear. "What's this?" Edward growled. "Memories money can't bury," the man said, unflinching. "You promised to help her. You swore to her mother you'd be there." Edward clenched his fists. "What do you want?" "Nothing, just justice." The man left, leaving the folder on the table. Edward stared at it for long seconds. Its contents could destroy his career, his current marriage, his reputation. Lucy. The name still weighed on him like lead. She'd been a mistake, a youthful error, he told himself. Her mother, a nurse who'd since passed away, refused to end the pregnancy. Desperate to protect his image, Edward paid an intermediary to ensure the girl was raised far away, well cared for but far. But now that past was about to become present. That night, Edward didn't sleep. He paced his country house, while a single option glowed on his phone screen. Silence the problem for good. No blood, no scandal, just a quiet, final solution. He dialed a number. "I need you to find a girl. No trace can be left." The next morning dawned with a weak sun that couldn't melt the ice on the sidewalks. Lucy waited at her usual corner, her coat pockets stuffed with breadcrumbs for Max. David was already there by the old rusty barrel he used as a fire pit, with Max curled up beside him, as if the dog knew she was coming. But that day something was different. Across the street, a sleek black sedan had been parked for over an hour. Inside, a man in his 40s, with slicked back brown hair and cold, clear eyes. His name was Michael Grant. He didn't use weapons, he didn't need to. His tool was manipulation. Michael had clear instructions: find the girl, gain her trust, and make her disappear. Enough to leave no loose ends, no blood, no witnesses, no body. 3 days of watching passed. Michael took notes, memorized schedules. He noticed Lucy's simple routine, her vulnerability, her spontaneous laugh, the way she talked to Max like he was a person, an easy target. Yet something about her stirred an unexpected unease in him. He didn't know if it was her sweetness or her complete inability to distrust. On the 4th day he approached. He wore a wool cap, plain clothes, a donation box in hand, and a sign around his neck that read, "Looking for my lost sister." Lucy saw him from afar. Her compassionate nature kicked in instantly. She approached alone while David stepped away a few yards to gather firewood. "Did you lose your sister?" she asked softly. Michael smiled. "She looks like you, light eyes, pale skin. They said she was seen around here. Would you like to meet my mom? She's sweet, like you." Lucy lowered her head, a bit confused but not scared. No one spoke to her like that. No one offered her a place. What if I was your sister?" she asked with brutal innocence. Michael didn't know what to say. His training hadn't prepared him for that purity. He swallowed hard and nodded. "Maybe you are, Lucy." Her eyes widened. "You know my name? Your mom told me. She asked me to come for you." Max growled then, low, as if he knew this man wasn't what he claimed. Michael petted the dog without fear, but Max didn't budge. Lucy, still confused, glanced at the alley. David hadn't returned. Michael seized the moment. He offered her a red scarf and said he'd take her to a place where she could see her mum. Lucy took it. The car was a few steps away. Michael opened the door. Max stepped between them. Lucy hesitated, but Michael called her my sister and put a hand on her shoulder. That was enough. Max barked for the first time in weeks, loud and sharp, but Lucy was already inside the car. When David returned, he found only breadcrumbs on the ground and tire tracks in the snow. The landscape changed. No more buildings, no city lights, no traffic noise, just empty fields covered in frost and an abandoned train line cutting through the earth like an old scar. The black sedan stopped near a crumbling station. Its broken windows looked like open mouths frozen in a scream. Michael turned off the engine. Lucy, calm until then, began to grow uneasy. "Where's my mom?" she asked, her voice shaky. "She's close, but we have to wait a bit," he replied, not looking at her. He helped her out of the car gently, his voice still soft as if it were all part of a game. He led her to the tracks with slow steps, not pushing her. Lucy, confused, followed. Her mind couldn't process the gap between kindness and threat. Miles away, Max ran without knowing why. His body knew what his mind couldn't explain. His nose caught the scent. His instincts screamed. David ran behind, his voice gone from shouting Lucy's name. The dog ignored commands. It wasn't obedience anymore. It was urgency. Michael knelt by the tracks. He pulled out a thick rope. Lucy took a step back. "What are you doing?" "I don't want you to get hurt. The train comes fast here." "But weren't we going to see my mom?" Michael didn't answer. With quick movements, he tied her wrists. Lucy began to cry, but without screams. Her tears were dry, restrained, like someone who'd learned shouting didn't help. "Please, don't leave me here. I'm sorry," he muttered. "It's not personal." He tied her to the steel rail with precision. He secured the knots. He stood without looking back. He didn't run. He walked slowly to the car. The sun was setting, and a nighttime freight train rumbled faintly in the distance. Lucy was alone. Lying on her side, her cheek against the cold metal, she breathed in short gasps. She didn't understand what she'd done wrong. She only knew it hurt. A bark cut through the air. Max. It started faint, but grew into a wild cry. Lucy lifted her head as much as she could. She saw him coming, a golden blur racing across the icy field, running like the world was ending. Max didn't think. He leaped over rocks, slipped, got up. He panted but didn't stop. He found her. He bit the rope. He barked. He pulled with his teeth. He clawed the dirt like his life depended on it. David appeared seconds later, gasping, his hands bloodied from the ice. "Lucy!" he shouted. She barely managed to say his name. "David, it hurts." He dropped to his knees, pulled out his old army knife. He cut the rope desperately. The train was coming. The ground shook. He scooped Lucy into his arms. Max pushed them with his body. The three rolled down the slope, just seconds before the train roared over the tracks like a blind beast. Lucy didn't speak. She trembled. David held her tight against his chest. Max sat beside them, unmoving, watching. No one said anything. They didn't need to. Night fell without asking, wrapping the open field in icy fog. David walked steadily along the roadside, Lucy wrapped in his old army coat. Max trotted beside them, more alert than ever, turning his head at every sound. The town was far, but not as far as the desperation they carried. David knew a place. A modest church on the edge of the old district, where Pastor John, a priest with a warm voice and calloused hands, had offered shelter to the invisible many times. They arrived past 9. Lucy no longer trembled from the cold, but from something deeper. Her body was safe, but her soul hadn't yet grasped why someone wanted to erase her from the world. Pastor John greeted them with a look that asked no questions. He offered blankets, warm bread, and a spot by the stone fireplace. Lucy curled up on a wooden bench, with Max lying at her feet like a silent guardian. "What did they do to that girl, David?" John asked quietly, pouring tea. "What the powerful do when they're scared? They tried to make her disappear like she was a mistake, but she's no mistake. She's a forgotten miracle." John nodded, his eyes wet. He knew evil hid in very clean places. That night, David wrote a letter by hand. He didn't know how to use email or social media, but he knew a local journalist who still believed in truth. Paul Reynolds, a young man with an old soul, always chasing stories that mattered. Paul showed up at the church the next morning, notebook and camera in hand. David told him everything, from the street friendship to Lucy's disappearance to the rescue on the tracks. Lucy didn't say much. She only said one line Paul would never forget. "I didn't cry, I just waited." Max came over then and rested his head on Lucy's lap. Paul took the photo. The image went viral in less than 24 hours. The story of the girl on the train and the hero dog spread through newspapers, newscasts, and social media. People reacted with anger, tenderness, tears, and questions. Days later, a DNA test requested by Pastor John's volunteer lawyer arrived in a sealed envelope. Edward Harrison was Lucy's biological father. No doubt about it. The pieces were falling into place, but the most important thing had already happened. The world finally saw Lucy, and she for the first time was starting to feel seen. The Harrison mansion was a world apart. High ceilings, Italian stained glass, carpets that muffled footsteps. But that morning, no silence was enough. Edward stared at the TV, his face frozen. On the screen, Lucy hugging a golden dog under the soft light of a rural church. The headline read, "She was tied to train tracks. A dog saved her." Her father might be a millionaire businessman. His wife, Margaret, appeared in the doorway, a folded newspaper in hand. She said nothing. She didn't need to. The front page told the same story. Her grey eyes already knew. "Is it true, Edward?" Edward swallowed hard. He didn't answer. The question carried the weight of a verdict. Hours later, the house was swarmed by cameras, microphones, and shouting reporters demanding a statement. Edward escaped through the back garage, but his once pristine image was already shattered. The prosecutor's office received a formal complaint filed by Paul Reynolds and the church's lawyer. It detailed the facts, the connections, the attempted murder, and the cover-up. David, the former soldier, gave his testimony calmly but firmly. Lucy didn't have to speak. Her silence was louder than any statement. The unexpected twist came from Michael Grant. Caught by authorities while trying to leave the state, he confessed everything. The contract, the instructions, the crime scene. But one thing he said changed the trial's course. "She looked me in the eyes and called me brother, and for a moment I wished it was true." His confession sealed Edward's guilt. The charges included attempted murder, child abandonment, and document tampering. The media dubbed the case the Invisible Daughter. While the trial went on, life at Grace Community Church continued humbly. Lucy no longer had nightmares. Max curled up beside her every night, and David tucked her in like she was made of glass. They weren't rich. They had no power. But they had something no fortune could buy: peace. One afternoon, Paul brought a package to the church. Inside were copies of the original note Lucy's mother left with her at birth, hidden for years in medical files. It read, "Take care of my girl. She's light, even if the world doesn't understand her." Lucy held the paper in her hands. She didn't cry. She just tucked it inside her favorite book. She knew her story was being told, but more importantly, she was no longer a shadow. The county courtroom was packed. Benches filled with curious onlookers, activists, mothers with children in their arms, reporters with worn notebooks and eager cameras. The Harrison versus State case had become a symbol, not just for the powerful man on trial, but for the small figure who, without speaking, represented thousands of other forgotten souls. Lucy arrived holding David's hand. She wore a simple light blue dress, her hair tied back in a braid made by Margaret Harrison. Yes, the wife of the accused. She'd left the mansion weeks ago and sought Lucy at the church to apologize, not for what Edward did, but for staying silent so long. Max entered the courtroom as a silent witness, a white bandana around his neck and a steady gaze. Many stood when they saw him. He was more than a dog. He was a symbol of loyalty in a world where betrayal was common. The judge, a stern-faced man with a deep voice, reviewed every detail of the case. The evidence was undeniable. The DNA, the confession, the bank transfers used to hide Lucy's identity, and above all, the clear intent to eliminate a minor for social convenience. Edward defended himself with empty words. "It was a youthful mistake. I feared ruining my family. I thought she'd be better off without me." But the judge wasn't swayed. "Mr. Harrison," he said, "it's not your wealth on trial here, but your humanity, and this court finds you lost it long ago." The sentence was clear: 20 years for attempted murder, 10 for deliberate abandonment, and a state-managed compensation payment for Lucy. No bail. Outside the courtroom, Lucy said nothing. Max stayed by her side, pressed against her leg as if still shielding her from the world. Paul Reynolds, the journalist, took one last photo. The light-eyed girl walking down the courthouse steps with the dog beside her and David behind, like an old angel with a father's soul. Days later, that image was painted on a city mural. Below it, a phrase written by Pastor John: "Sometimes heaven sends help with pause." Lucy's story moved the nation. Schools sent her letters, children drew her story, animal shelters saw a surge in adoptions. But the most important thing wasn't on the news. It was in the heart of a girl who no longer feared closing her eyes at night. At last, justice wasn't just a word. It was a silent embrace life had been slow to give her. Grace Community Church held its morning service among worn wooden pews, small candles lit by humble hands, and stained glass that filtered light as if the heavens themselves breathed inside. For weeks, Lucy was no longer just a sheltered guest. She was part of the place's living soul. Pastor John, in his frayed robe and unshaken faith, had rallied the community. With donations from neighbors, volunteer efforts, and legal support, they acquired a small plot behind the main building. There, with calloused hands and willing hearts, they built a simple, warm wooden house with 2 bedrooms, a modest kitchen, and a white picket fence. The day Lucy saw the finished house, she didn't ask if it was for her. She just looked at David, who stood quietly holding his cap, and hugged him tightly. He didn't respond with words. He just stroked her hair and said, "We're going to plant nice things here." Max walked in first. He sniffed every corner. He jumped on the couch without asking, like he already felt at home. Lucy laughed for the first time in days. The following days were slow, without jolts. Lucy helped water the garden, learned to bake bread with Margaret, who visited regularly, and decorated the walls with drawings. One showed a stopped train and a golden dog biting the tail of fate. David framed it and hung it above the door. "So the past knows it doesn't call the shots here," he said. Each night before bed, Lucy read passages from a children's book to Max, who listened, sprawled on the rug as if he understood every word. David, from the kitchen, brewed mint tea. Sometimes he cried where no one could see, not from sadness, but from gratitude, for being found when he no longer expected it. One day, while unpacking boxes, they found an old wooden chalkboard. Lucy cleaned it and wrote, in uneven but steady letters, "Foster Family." They hung the sign by the front door next to a bundle of dried lavender. The house was no longer just a shelter. It was home. The sunset fell slowly over the backyard of the little house. Dry leaves crunched under Lucy's soft steps as she watered the garden she'd helped plant. Wild roses, lavender, crooked sunflowers. No perfect order, but a unique harmony, like her life. Max followed her, as always. He didn't run like before, but his eyes still held that spark that said, "I'm here." Lucy knelt, looked him in the eyes, and whispered, "You're not just a dog, you're my angel." Max wagged his tail and pressed his nose into her palm, as if confirming he knew. Inside the house, David cooked a thick soup with rye bread. Since moving in, he'd grown used to these small rituals. Everything was simple, and everything made sense. Paul Reynolds had promised no more stories about them. But that day, he showed up with one last letter. It was from an 8-year-old girl in Carolina who'd adopted an old dog from a shelter after hearing Lucy's story. The letter read, "I want to be like her, because if someone like Lucy can be happy, then I can too." Lucy asked David to read the letter aloud again that night, with Max asleep at her feet. That was the night they all knew, without saying it, that something in the air had changed. The darkness that once seemed eternal had grown light. The world wasn't perfect, but their little corner was. Days later, during a Sunday service, Pastor John called Lucy forward and placed a small carved wooden cross in her hands. "It wasn't about religion," he said. "It was a symbol. Not to make you believe," he explained. Tell me in the comments, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate this story so far? Your opinion means a lot to me. But to remind you, there was a moment when all seemed lost, and still, someone came for you. Lucy smiled. Not much, just enough for everyone to know she understood. At the house's front door, the sign still hung, "Foster Family," and below, written in fresh white paint, a new phrase, "Even if the world abandons you, a noble soul can find you." Max, sitting just beneath it, stared at the horizon, as if still waiting for whoever needed him most. 3 years have passed. The Foster family house still stood, with its white picket fence and a garden grown a bit wilder, as if the flowers had decided to grow as they pleased. The wood showed the first marks of time, but the inside was warm, filled with photos, drawings, and memories that didn't hurt. Lucy was now 18. She finished her basic studies with help from a volunteer teacher and started working at a community library. Her speech was clearer, her gaze steadier, but the sweetness that always defined her remained untouched. Sometimes she paused by the shelves just to sort books by color, as if organizing the world with small gestures. David, despite a slower step and a whiter beard, stayed strong. With the church's support, he started a small program for abandoned youth. He never wanted titles or honors. He said, seeing a look like Lucy's find peace was enough to make it all worthwhile. Max had aged. He slept more, walked less, and no longer chased butterflies. But every time Lucy left the house, he followed her to the gate, sat, and watched her go. And when she returned, he wagged his tail like he hadn't seen her in years. Michael Grant, the man who nearly destroyed that life, was serving a reduced sentence. In prison, he volunteered to train service dogs for veterans. No one knew why he chose it. Maybe it was his way of seeking forgiveness without saying it. Edward Harrison served his sentence in silence. He gave no interviews. He wrote no memoirs. He only received once a month an unsigned letter with a single line, "I don't hate you, but I learned to live without you." Lucy never signed those letters. She didn't send them to punish, but to heal. The city mural stayed untouched. Though time had faded it slightly, the image of the girl and the dog still stopped passers-by. Some said it brought luck. Others just stood in silence, as if looking at it reminded them small miracles still exist. And on summer nights, when fireflies filled the garden and the breeze carried the scent of wet earth, Lucy sat on the porch with a blanket over her legs. Max, now grey and slow, lay beside her. David played the harmonica clumsily, and the stars seemed to listen. They no longer expected anything from the world, because they had already found everything. Thank you so much for sticking with this story until the end. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a ton and motivates us to keep bringing new stories every week. And since you're here, take a moment to check out another one of our stories that's popping up on your screen. Big hug and see you next time. Stay well.